Hey guys, Richard Laura here again with PPG Industries. You know, I'm a territory manager here in Southern California, and I'm going to tell you about a conversation I had with a painter recently. About this painter, he's been in the industry for 30 years, and just recently, about 3 months ago, came over to PPG. He's been using a different premium brand in the industry. Now he's using PPG, and he asked me a question, great question. He said, Richard, I've been painting for 30 years, but I've always kind of struggled with one area of painting, and that is with plastic parts. Not all of the time, just some of the time, we'll get a car that comes back and it's either chipping or some paint's peeling off it, and I don't like that. I take a lot of pride in my work, and you know, if the color doesn't match or the gloss goes down or something like that, or the paint peels off my bumper, I take offense. I'm very prideful. This is what he's telling me. I'm thinking this is a great conversation. And he said to me, he says, you gotta give me the right products and the right process so that when I paint that plastic part, it leaves and it never comes back. So that's what we're gonna do, guys. If I come to your shop and I train with you, regardless of the topic, I'm going to take a very logical approach to how we train, because I've learned over the years there's some inherent potholes in the road of communication. What I say isn't always what you hear, and what you hear isn't always understood. And so I want to always take that back all the way up and start at the beginning and take a logical approach and check for understanding as we go along. That's what we're going to do in this video. So regarding the topic of a raw plastic part and how to cause adhesion on that, because that's what this video is about, we're going to talk about what I like to call my 7 effective habits for proper adhesion on a plastic part. The first 5 you're probably already doing, but we are going to look at them. Clean the product, clean the part first, make sure it's dry, dust-free, smooth, and check for porosity. I'm going to go outside in the workshop right now, and we're going to go through all of these in a small demo, and I'll talk about them all the time. When we come back in, we're going to talk about number 6 and number 7. And I'm going to call those the X factor. And that's the piece that my friend was probably missing or misunderstanding. He was probably doing it but didn't understand exactly what he was doing it. So occasionally when you don't understand, you miss the mark and something comes back with a problem. So let's go out in the workshop and check the first 5 out. Hey, we've come out into the workshop and we're going to look at the first 5 habits in my 7 effective habits for proper adhesion on a raw plastic part. Now these are really elementary steps and you're probably already doing them, but they're also very fundamental. If you do these consistently and correctly every time, you're going to make sure that whatever coating you put on this raw plastic part is going to stay on this raw plastic part. So let's get into this. The first 3 I'm going to kind of clump together here. Clean it, dry it, and make it dust free. Cleaning it's kind of a 2-step process. I'm going to use 2 different cleaners. The first one I'm going to use, and you can do these in any order. You don't have to start with water, but I'm going to use a waterborne degreaser. And I'm using a waterborne degreaser so it can remove any waterborne contaminants. Now what I'm doing here is I'm saturating that part. I'm taking and I'm completely saturating. Don't just sprinkle this stuff on there. Give it a second and then wipe it with a dry, clean, dry cloth to remove any of those waterborne water-soluble contaminants, and then take another dry cloth to make sure we can dry this thing off. And that's part of the drying process. We want to get these volatiles or these solvents out of there. The second step is repeat, but now with a solvent. This is a multi-prep, and what I want to do is do exactly the same thing. Is I'm going to saturate this with a solvent. The reason I'm using a solvent degreaser is because I want to remove any solvent-borne contaminants like a tar, road tar, or something like that. I'm saturating this. I'm going to take, again, a clean cloth. I'm going to dry this thing off, remove any solvent-borne contaminants. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to take another dry cloth. I'm going to dry that. And again, I want the volatiles to come out. I don't want to put any coating on here until all my volatiles, my solvents, have come out of this plastic part. Dust-free, I'm going to take a tack rag. You say, well, of course I'm going to take a tack rag. Right, you're going to take a tack rag because you don't want any dust on there. But wiping a plastic, the action of wiping a plastic does something. It creates a static charge. So we want to avoid a static charge. This is not going to create it, but wiping it consistently with cloths and the wrong degreaser will cause a static charge. And I want to make a mention that a wrong degreaser would be a standard degreaser like this is SXA 330. It's used on sheet metal. If I use this on this, I'm going to create a static charge, which does two things. It attracts dirt. So if I use this on this, I'm going to create a static charge, attract dirt or dust. So that goes, it flies in the face of dust free. In a low humid environment, it's also a problem. A static charge is a problem. It can cause a spark and it can be a fire hazard. So don't use a standard degreaser on a raw plastic part. Keep this for sheet metal. Not all of the parts that you get, plastic parts that you get in the paint shop are perfect plastic parts. Quite often they come out of a box and they get handed to you and they're less than perfect. So an option, if it's less than clean, it maybe have a box mark on it or some box glue on it or something, you can take a sanding paste SX 1002, a gray pad, and use it wet, and use it liberally as well, wet, and clean that pad up with this as an option. This is an abrasive way of cleaning. It's not sanding the bumper, it's cleaning the bumper. So that's a great option if it's a less than perfect part. What we've talked about so far is dealing with a raw plastic part, how to clean it and keep it dust free, make it smooth and prepare it to go into the paint shop. But we also know that when you get a bumper sent to you, it's one of two things. It's either raw or it's primed. If it's primed, you have a decision to make. You have to do a solvency test on that because we want to check for porosity. What is porosity? Porosity is in this case, it would be a coating or a primer on there that if I put solvent on top of that primer, it would dissolve it, it would wipe it off. That's a porous primer. I call it a cheap transport primer. So when you get that part and you notice it's primed, you have to do a solvency test on that. Take something like multi-prep or maybe a gun cleaner, and you're going to wipe that with a cloth if it's primed, and you wipe that solvent, and if it comes off clean, then it's a good solid primer that you can sand and seal and clean and seal and go on with your top coat. But if you put a solvent on that and you wipe it and it comes off like this, and I know it does because I've seen it a bunch of times when I've been in shops, and the painter's wiping this and he says, why is all this coming off? I said, whoa, it's a cheap transport primer. We've got to remove that. Unfortunately, we've got to take that back down to raw plastic, which brings us right back around here to cleaning it correctly. So, cheap transport primer has to be removed. It's a porous substrate. If we put our system on top of that, we're going to have failure every single time. So check for porosity, check for cheap transport primer. And I think we've pretty much covered these elementary steps. Let's go back in the classroom and look at number 6 and number 7. Hey guys, we're back in from outside where we looked at these first 5 habits of clean it, dry it, dust free, making sure it's smooth, and we check for porosity. All fundamental steps that are done consistently and correctly, all for one goal in mind, and that is to create a wettable surface. Let me write that down, wettable. Having a wettable surface, what does that mean? That means that the basis of any adhesion comes from having a wettable surface. That's where my liquid hits the surface and sheets out, wets out. That's the basis for good adhesion. This is my first X factor in the process of painting raw plastic parts. I have to do all of this to make sure I've created a wettable surface so that my liquid will sheet out. I want to show you a quick demonstration. It's pretty graphic. It's a great demonstration of what good wetting and poor wetting looks like. In other words, what good adhesion is and what bad adhesion could be. The purpose of this demonstration is to show the difference between good adhesion and bad adhesion. The foundation of good adhesion is to have your liquid come into a very close, intimate contact with your surface, your hard surface. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take water, which is a very high surface tension liquid, and I'm going to put some straight onto this substrate here, and you can see how it beads up. It beads up. It doesn't want anything to do with this surface at all. But if I take some of this rubbing alcohol, which is a low surface tension liquid, and I put it on there, you can see how it sheets up. But watch this, when I tilt these, it's much more dramatic. You can see the water has actually left the panel completely, and the alcohol has sheeted out beautifully. Essentially what we have here is really good adhesion because we have a very close intimate contact. And here we have what will be bad adhesion because we have no contact. So that was a great example of wetting. So now that you know this, I want to move on to the number 7 in our effective habits for proper adhesion. And this is the X factor here. This is polarity. And I want to talk about this. That's not a word that you hear in the body shop. What the heck is polarity and why is it important? I'm going to try and explain it in simple terms. If you've ever played with a magnet, and I've got some magnets strapped to these little cups here, you'll know that a magnet has 2 sides. It has a north side and a south side, or it has a positive side and a negative side. If I put 2 of the same sides together, in this case I have, you see that? I got a north and a north. They don't like each other. So essentially what I have is a polar and a non-polar. If I take 2 opposites that are both polar, I get attraction. Well, that's exactly what's going on with this plastic part here. Everything that you have in your shop, all liquids are all polar. The surfaces you work with, they're polar. So when I put my polar liquid on my polar surface, I get this. Problem with plastics is they're not polar, they're non-polar. So if I take a raw plastic part and I seal it, I'm essentially trying to do this. No, I'm not. I'm essentially trying to do this. See, they're not attracted. So what I have to do is I have to turn this non-polar surface into a polar surface. And the way I do that is really easy. I do it with a product called an adhesion promoter. You've seen these, but it's the X factor. If you don't use it or you don't use it correctly, it's not going to work. Now I have SUA 470LV in an aerosol, and I have SU 470LV in a can. You can put it into your cup. You can spray it on, and this is what we're going to go do in the booth right now. We're going to take this product, apply it to this raw plastic, and we're going to take this non-polar surface and turn it into a surface that is polar, so when we spray it with our sealer, we've got perfect adhesion. Hey guys, we're heading out to the spray booth. I got my SU 470LV. I put a little bit in this cup. You can see it's translucent. It's got a little bit of mica pigment in there so I can see when it's actually on there. I'm going to spray it through a top coat gun, about a 1.3 fluid tip I think I have out there. 25 PSI. I'm going to put a single wet coat on there and let it flash, and then we'll come back into the classroom when it's done. Well, we're back in from the spray booth where we've just painted this raw plastic part with an adhesion promoter. Essentially what we did, we took a non-polar surface and we created a polar surface, a polar substrate, so we can now top coat it with sealer, base coat, and clear coat and finish this. We're not actually going to do that. We've just brought it to this stage and we're going to stop. Let me recap what we did. We talked about these 7 effective habits for causing proper adhesion. These are the fundamental basics. These are the things that you do all day long, but we want to make sure you keep doing them correctly and consistently. Clean it, make sure it's dry, keep it dust free, make sure it's smooth, and always check for that porosity. All of this is done to achieve a wettable surface. If our paint doesn't sheet out, if it doesn't wet on our surface, and this goes for any surface, if our liquid paint doesn't wet out, we don't have a wettable surface. If we don't have a wettable surface, we're not going to have a good job. And finally, when dealing with plastic specifically, we have to address the polarity thing. Now, typically we'll say, hey, put an adhesion promoter on this. But if you don't know why you're putting an adhesion promoter on, sometimes it gets left out. It doesn't really matter. It does matter. Raw plastic is a non-polar surface. You gotta put that adhesion promoter on it so that now we can put our sealer, our base coat, our clear coat, and that job can go down the road. And I think we've covered everything there. I hope I answered your question about causing adhesion on raw plastic parts, and thank you guys.